Nope. There we go. Ha ha. Now you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. I'm David McMillan. Welcome to Samuel, Saul, and David. I'm so glad you could be here today. Looking forward to this class. We've got this is our fourth class today. Before we get started, let's go ahead and have a quick prayer, shall we? Father God, we love you so much, and we thank you for your presence in our lives. We thank you for your presence in the Word. We thank you for all those wonderful things that are there in the Word and that we can learn. We pray that you bless this lesson, help us to learn from it. Be with our military folks as we remember them this weekend, and be with everyone here and help them to learn. The people in the audience as well as myself. Pray all this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, let's move right along. We've finally gotten here. This is a one-man show, 1 Samuel 16 through 17. We're finally going to talk about David today. So today is going to be a good day. The thing that's kind of unusual and the thing that has been my constant fear for the last several weeks is that I am going to teach a group of adults about David and Goliath. Now, some of you may have heard the story David and Goliath already. Probably most of you have heard it when you're about 5 years old or so, or maybe even younger, some of you. So now here's the thing. This is a David and Goliath class for adults. And so we're going to try to demystify some of the stuff you might have learned when you were a child and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. I've done everything I can. I promise you one thing. I've done everything I can to make this story interesting. So let's see if I succeeded. All right, last week, here's our summary. If you weren't here last week, have a quick look there. Basically, we're moving on from Jonathan's victory. Jonathan and David we'll talk about next week. But one of the things that's important to remember is that Jonathan was driven by faith, just like David is driven by faith. All right. I did the summary really quick because I want to make sure we get through this lesson. This time, maybe we'll get through, okay? The first thing I want to address, David was the only Bible character to use a sling, right? Is that right? Nope, it's not right. And here's one thing, and when I talk about this lesson, I'll be talking a little bit about what you learned when you're a little kid and what you learn now. And I know for a fact, one time when I was a kid, I was told that David killed Goliath with a toy weapon. But slings aren't really toys. It's not Dennis the Menace. It's not a slingshot. It's a sling. Before Goliath, in Judges chapter 20, talks about 700 slingers from Benjamin. Now, Benjamin is the tribe that the first king of Israel, whose name starts with S and ends with L, and sounds like Saul, that's where he's from. Other Bible clues suggest that it was cultural in their family. So, Judges 20 talks about 700 slingers from Benjamin, okay? That's interesting, because I completely missed that. After Goliath, does it talk about slingers, or is that the end of slingers? No. 2 Kings chapter 3 talks about slingers in the army, and 1 Chronicles chapter 12 talks about Benjamite slingers who joined David. So, slingers are part of the army. Now, let's talk about slingers who aren't even in the Bible. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you went to West Point, you would study this guy. The guy's name is Hannibal Barcus. He's a famous Carthaginian general, once defeated 55,000 Romans at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. He employed 2,000 slingers, and one of the slingers killed the general Lucius Paulus. So, slings, legitimate weapon, okay? It's not a toy, it's a real weapon. It's not surprising. Slings have a range of 400 meters and a top projectile speed of 62 miles per hour. But still, here's the thing about slings, and this is why David mentioned slings. It's a peasant's weapon. Anybody can have a sling. All you need is a little piece of leather and a pouch. and you can find your ammo on the ground at your feet. So it's a peasant's weapon. Think of slingers as gunslingers before gunpowder. Hence the name slinger, gunslinger. You know, guns are just fancy slings. All right. That's our first little bit. I'll intersperse this. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." I find this phrasing interesting. I have provided for myself a king among his sons. He didn't go ahead and tell him, oh, it's the youngest son or which son it was. He says, I've just provided for myself a king among your sons. So let's just let it be a surprise when you get there. I'll tell you who it is. I think that's interesting, that God wanted him to have a little bit of a surprise. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. Samuel led an interesting life, always wondering what God's going to tell him to do. And you shall anoint for me him who I declare to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me. And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So notice, okay, here, he consecrated Jesse and his sons. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. This is big memory verse, good one to remember. I always remember this one because those of us who struggle with the outside appearance can always work on our heart. Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. Hey, hold on. Didn't he say, and he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to sacrifice? So even when he consecrated them, he didn't count David as one of the sons, evidently, because he wasn't there, so he hadn't been consecrated yet. He was out tending the sheep. So David got left out of the list of sons. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. This ESV does a lot of things I like, but I don't remember the beautiful eyes part that much, except in this verse. But I like it. And David's looks are mentioned a lot when you study this. And I think that's interesting. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward, and Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Ramah is his home base. All right, here's our audience participation part. I'm kind of excited about this. I'll try not to dwell on it too much because I could spend all day on this. All right, this is a show of hands. You have to participate or you'll be expelled. How many of you are the firstborn? Raise your hand. If you're the firstborn, raise your hand up high. Be proud. Be firstborn. Okay, now, if you're firstborn, a lot of times, firstborn are good managers. Now, I put these little characteristics because, you know, the science of birth order is way from exact. But firstborns are usually good managers. Why? Because, number one, in a child's family, if you're the oldest, who gets put in charge of the younger children? The oldest child, always. Now, the youngest child would describe the firstborn as the bossy one. And that's not unusual because they're usually the one that tells you what to do. All right, show of hands. Who's a middle child? Raise your hand. If you're a middle child, okay, awesome, great. Now, middle children are peacemakers. Why? Well, it just makes sense. If older brothers causing trouble, they get no attention. If younger brothers causing trouble, they get no attention. Only when everybody's at peace do they get attention. They also get hand-me-downs, lots of different things. But 50% of the U.S. presidents are middle children. So if you're a middle child, be proud, because you have a good chance of being president. The best chance you're going to ever have is if you're a middle child. Now, all the Rushmore presidents and a lot of the good ones, middle children. Now, lastly, raise your hand. Be proud. Who's the youngest children in here? Come on. I'm the youngest child. Youngest child are the best. I'm just kidding. But youngest children are often described as carefree. Now, youngest children, this is part of my theory on, we'll discuss it later. Youngest children are never put in charge of anybody, because that would be a disaster. Youngest children are just waiting. Whenever they're in a room with another person, that person is in charge of the youngest child. Youngest children are not used to accepting responsibility because we don't have to. Other people are there to serve us. That's right. So when we come over to your house, we'll sit there and smile and wait for you to bring us something, because we're not used to doing it ourselves. We're the least successful group. There are only 18% are U.S. presidents. Now, how many good Old Testament Bible characters are the youngest or younger? I left out one I left out Shem, but this thing looks so perfect, I hate to put Shem in there. Shem is in there, though. But look you got Abel, Isaac. Now, Isaac, it's a half. Jacob, Joseph. Joseph's not really technically the youngest, but as far as that story goes, he is the youngest because the other guys are born so much later, it doesn't matter. It's like they have a bunch of youngest. But he's equivalently the youngest. Why do the older brothers hate him? Because he's arrogant and cocky. And they think, you don't have any right to be like that. And he's just going, no, I'm just being me. Ephraim is one you may not remember. Moses, older brother Aaron, Gideon, Jotham. I know you don't know Jotham, but Jotham's in the story of Abimelech. I like Jotham. He's awesome. Of course, David and Solomon. So that's a lot of good characters. Why the obsession with the youngest? Well, I think one of the things maybe is the fact that youngest children are so used to being taken care of that it just comes naturally for them to have a lot of faith. They have faith in everybody around them, and I think that may be a factor. But I don't want to skew things too much, because maybe it's not. But here's a verse that just stuck out to me like a sore thumb in the ESV, the way it translates it. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader is one who serves. But who is the greater, the one who reclines at the table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? Of course it is. Of course it is. But I am among you as the one who serves. So, what is this saying? This is saying that we should live life like every day is something we don't deserve. If you're going around feeling like you deserve whatever it is, God's not all that impressed with you. And God wants you to believe that every day is a gift. Everything you've been given is a gift. Life is full of grace. We have air to breathe. I can hear you today because of the magic of a few $1,000s worth of things in my ears. And it's really great for me. It's a whole new experience. But we should live every day like it's a gift. All right. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. That verse always bothers my mom. It bothers me a little bit, but let's not worry about the from the Lord part there. And Saul's servants said to him, behold now, a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. Very observant servants to make such an astute observation. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre. Pay attention to the word liar. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about the word liar. And when the harmful spirit of God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well. And so Saul said to his servants, provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me. This is my favorite verse in the whole 1 Samuel, if you want to know the description of David. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 18. One of the young men answered, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a man of good presence, and 6, the Lord is with him. If you want to know who David is, these servants knew who he was. Don't ask me how, but they sure did. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse, saying, send me David, your son, who's with the sheep. I don't need to tell you that David got the gig. Of course, there wasn't that many applicants. He was the only one, but David got the job. Now, this concludes the first part of David's life. David's life is over. A lot of times when you're teaching the little kids, this is the first lesson, and then we go to the next lesson of David and Goliath. But to me, there's just not enough story here. I'm sorry. But it's interesting to know. David was a musician. If you do not remember that David is a musician, you will not understand David. How many of you know musicians? Musicians are usually a little bit different. They're a little bit more emotional. David's very emotional. Think of him as a musician first. All right, we're moving right along, going to Goliath and Gear. Now there came out of the camp, the Philistines, a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, stick that little 6 cubit in a span in your head for a minute, because we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. Goliath had armor on his head, body, and shins, and had a shield bearer in front of him. He was armed with a javelin on his back and a spear, also carried a sword. You may think this is just some random armor I picked up. This is actually the most likely accurate depiction of his armor. I'm an armor buff. I'm a military buff, and this is based off of some Egyptian drawings from what we call the Sea People. The Philistines are in the group of people called the Sea People, and their warriors did have the horns on the head, so it's not the Vikings. Vikings actually didn't do that, but the Sea People actually did have the horns on the head. So this is very likely, and also this style of cuirass, that's very likely what it looked like. So kind of intimidating. I would hate to see that on the battlefield. Now, this is also a drawing, and this is, sometimes you see this a lot. It has this sort of thing on the top. That could be little, either strips of leather, maybe some sort of ornamental part. Some people show horsehair. But here's another thing. Look how that helmet goes down. So it goes down a little bit on the bridge of the nose. So that covers a lot of the forehead. So if Goliath wore one of these helmets, it'd be more of a challenge to hit him with a stone. And that may be what he wore. Goliath's weapons were superior to almost all of Israel's weapons because bronze held an edge. That's where the whole Bronze Age comes into play, because bronze holds an edge. It's not that strong, but it holds an edge. And that makes a huge difference. Really, the technology that the Philistines had that the Israelites did not have is the ability to make a very hot fire to work metal. That's really all it is. When you have that ability to make that really hot fire, you can work metal. You are instantly far superior to all your enemies because metal holds an edge. Metal is better than leather as far as protecting you. Goliath's armor could have protected against almost all of Israel's weapons. Let's face it. What is most of Israel's weapons? Sharp, pointy sticks. That's really what they have. That's the main thing. Remember, they don't have a blacksmith. A lot of their implements have stone heads. Very few actual metal points. Most of their metal points went into their tills, things like that. So no one person can get close enough to use swords or spears. You don't want to try to get close enough to use a sword or spear against a giant because their arms are long. And those long arms will hit you way before you get a chance to get there, okay? That's why giants are scary, is because those big long arms. But here's another thing. It kind of goes against Goliath. No one ever brings this up. if you're going to try to hit something with a projectile weapon, it helps if they're bigger. So Goliath did have a disadvantage because he's really big, okay? And he was also vulnerable to slung stones. We talked about slingers before. So slung stones, David's weapon, he didn't pick a toy weapon. He picked actually the very best weapon against Goliath, probably the only thing that could have worked, because if you want to get Goliath, he'll destroy you. But if you have one perfectly aimed shot, that's it. And that's the end of it. That's what we're hoping on. The hope against hope. The hole-in-one, the one shot. Goliath's helmet obviously protected his head, including most of his forehead. I already talked about that a little. Moving on. And I need some water. And the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Clearly, Goliath is showing a little bit of impatience here. No one will even challenge him because he's the scariest guy they've ever seen. Now, one of the things you may not understand is this all happened in the Valley of Elah. It's all well documented. We all know, I mean, you may not remember Valley of Elah, but you have two camps. They're parked at least a mile apart, okay? Goliath has to go down in the valley to shout up his curses at them because they'll never hear him from a mile away. And it could be up to 3 miles away. I've heard some say 3 miles away. But we'll look at a map. When Saul of all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, greatly afraid. Notice I skipped a bunch of verses. And for 40 days, the Philistine came forward, took his stand morning and evening. I hate leaving out verses, but I'm running late, so I have to leave out some verses. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come out to draw for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. He uses that word a lot. It's like, come on, man up, guys. Are you just so afraid of me? Let him come down to me. Notice he says down to me because he's in the valley of Elah. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him, kill him, then you shall be our servants and service. This is a battle for slavery. This is a single combat surrogate fight. One of the things that makes this so special in all of the Bible, you never see this again, is the one-on-one, the duel, if you will. It's the showdown. And that's one of the things that makes this special. But here, let me demystify a little bit again. Were there giants before Goliath? Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today, to go in to dispossess nations greater and mightier than you, cities, great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the sons of the Anakim, and whom you know, and whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak? And that's Deuteronomy. And Caleb drove out from there 3 sons of Anak, Shishai, and Ahiman, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. Anybody know those guys? Are they nearly as... those are the same... Whenever you say giants, I usually say Shishai. That's like, he's my favorite giant. Or Talmai. No, you don't. You don't even remember him. Because David and Goliath is far the coolest giant battle in the whole Bible. Because none of the other stories of defeating giants are even listed. They have their names. All right, this is interesting. When you're studying giants, you say, hey, I want to know about giants in the Bible. Well, they say the Valley of the Rephaim. Valley of Rephaim goes here. There's a little brook. It's the Sorek. It starts on the coast, works its way down past Ekron, a Philistine city, Gath, and it works its way on down. Now here is Azekah, and that's the Valley of Elah. Now, Elah is a creek that's dry most of the time. In the eastern, in the Middle East, they call them wadis, but that's where that is. But the Valley of Rephaim goes from Sorek on down to Jerusalem. That is where these giants lived. That is their home place. So it doesn't surprise me that you have a giant from Gath. He just moved to the Philistine city. But the giants, most of the giants in the Bible are in that valley. So I think that's interesting. Are there giants out after Goliath? Well, of course there are. Now, I didn't put a Bible verse here, but trust me, just, hit the little search button and type in Sippai. But Sippai, descendant of the giants. Lammy makes him sound really weak, but Lammy, the brother of Goliath. And don't forget the giant that had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. For some reason, the Bible insists that we realize that's 24, okay? I'm not sure why they do that. I think math was not a subject they had, but that's 24. That's a lot of fingers and toes, folks. But anyway, so there were giants after Goliath. So is the fact that Goliath was a giant, is that big a unique thing in the Bible? Not really. There was lots of giants. Remember when Joshua and Caleb and the 12 spies went into lands? What was that phrase they said? We are like what? We are like grasshoppers? One of my favorite phrases, because I never feel like a grasshopper. I'm really short, but I would never describe myself as a grasshopper. All right, well, what about giants not in the Bible? I always, historically teaching the kids, I love Robert Pershing Wadlow, 8 foot 11 inches, Alton, Illinois. If you don't believe me, go to Alton, Illinois. There's a big 8 foot 11 statue of Robert Pershing Wadlow. Okay, he's 8 foot 11. Now, also go to Wikipedia, because Frank Winkelmeyer from Austria was 8 foot 6, and Wikipedia is chock full of giants. If you want to find a bunch of giants, they're all in there, all the tallest people ever listed. Now, Robert is listed as the tallest person ever officially recorded, although the Bible records Goliath as being bigger. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about that just a tiny bit, because it's not that big a deal to me. But just in case, I don't want anybody to get upset. Goliath is recorded as 6 cubits in a span, but he's also recorded as 4 cubits in a span. And so it's a Septuagint. So that's under 7 foot to almost 10 foot. NET, if you have an NET Bible, your NET Bible will say he's almost 7 foot. And when I started doing this, I was using NET Bible, and I had all my verses out, and I was like, oh no, I can't have, I do not want Goliath to be under 7 foot. That completely blows the story. So I changed all my verses. I had like 12 lessons done, and I changed my version. But now hold on just a second. I just want you to realize something. The 7 foot, the under 7 foot, the NET Bible, it uses the Septuagint. The Septuagint is one of the Bible manuscripts that is responsible for us having 1st and 2nd Samuel. Otherwise, it wouldn't be 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's also responsible for the order of the Old Testament books, because that's not the Masoretic version. They have a different order. So Septuagint, is it important? Yes, it's super important. And which one's right? And the answer is, I don't care. Anybody that's tall is a giant. All you guys are giants. I'm a regular-sized person. Everybody else in here is a giant, as far as I'm concerned, all right? I'm the size people should be. You have to understand that. But anyway, in case you want to know, for one thing, a cubit is a measure of the forearm to middle finger. So we all know that's a perfectly accurate form of measurement. And my cubit is just exactly the same length as your cubit. Now, a span is the span of your hands. Hold your hand like that. That's a span. So they also use interesting enough, they also use that in horses. But they call them hands. They say it's a horse is so many hands high. But so hands are still used. It's the ruler that you'll always have. You'll never lose it. Unless you go into battle with Goliath, and then you may lose it. But it's a ruler you always have. David's routine in those days, Saul, the man, was already old and advanced in years. His 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul into battle. I cut those out earlier. But the 3 names are Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. Shammah with the coolest name, of course. David was the youngest. The three eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep in Bethlehem. Now, from the time he was playing the lyre to this time, probably about 3 or 4 years, he might have started playing the lyre when he was about 12. So that's a great job for a guy who's 12, playing for the king. That would be awesome. Can you imagine how cool that would be? It's like, man, I'm such a good lyre player. I'm playing for the king. And it sure beats watching sheep, right? But a lot of time passes. And that, evidently, the lyre playing job was not so steady. So he went back and forth and did the sheep job. Oh, here we go. All right, here's our map. I try not to put too many maps on there because there's just not a lot here. But here's your Soka, your Philistine camp, and your Azekah Israelite camp on this side. There's tons and tons of pictures online that actually show this valley, but it's so unimpressive and uninteresting, I just left it out. It's just a little hill. It just looks like you're going to Allen, okay? Not even bigger than going to Allen. It's just little hills. But here we see, the one thing you do see here is you see the Sorek Brook, and you see the Elah Wadi here. And it shows you your different directions. And Jesse said to David his son, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. Remember when God was telling about what a king's going to do to you? He's going to give you commanders of thousands. And I remember Brian in the sermon, he mentioned all the things that God said the kings would do happen. Here's an example. Commanders of thousands happened a couple of times directly in the story of David, so it's interesting. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard them. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? One of the things that's a little bit frustrating if you're reading this thing is the way they do the order on this, because first they explain what the guy said, and then he asks what they said, and then they tell him what he said. So it gets a little bit confusing. But the idea is that you're going to get riches, and David asks around a bunch of times just to make sure he was right. Now here, let's take a little time to reflect. Hold on. Israel is not without a king, right? Israel has a king that's head and shoulders taller than everyone else. Isn't he the perfect guy to fight the giant? The tall guys are the guys that should fight the giants, right? Not the short guys, not the little kids. By this time he was old. It says clearly that he was old, but he certainly wasn't too old to chase David, which we learn later. Maybe he thought he was taking care of the problem by offering money to solve it. If anybody has ever had the chance to take care of a problem by throwing money at it, it's very satisfying and very easy to do. But at the same time, you really don't feel like you really overcame the problem. You just threw money at it, and whatever happened, happened. That's what Saul's doing. But the Lord was not with him, and his leadership suffered without the Lord's help. That's the reason I think Saul didn't just get up and fight him himself. Now, Eliab, his older brother, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you've come down to see the battle. Eliab accuses David of rubbernecking, and David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? Chill, brother, chill. And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. Again, like I said, he's making sure he understands what will be done. The interesting thing here about Eliab's comment is the same comment was made about Eliab. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not be impressed by his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. God does not view things the way people do. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Eliab was dead wrong. Eliab doesn't know what's in David's heart. David had a good heart. Eliab did not have the good heart. That's why he wasn't picked. So, irony upon irony. Let's heap it on. Eliab was wrong. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. So just asking about what the reward would be for the guy who fought the Philistine was enough to get you brought before the king. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him." I've taught this lesson so many times, and for some reason I never got that. I just love that. Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him. You're just a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." He was like going, "Hold your horses, David. You're really not the guy to go. I appreciate your enthusiasm. You're really not the guy to go." Why doesn't David just quit here? I mean, for Pete's sake, his dad doesn't even count him as one of his sons. He was anointed a long time ago. But I'll tell you one thing about David. He's very patient. He was anointed 3 or 4 years ago, and he's just been chilling. He's not doing anything. He's not assuming anything. He's been anointed. He knows he's special, but it doesn't change his behavior. He just lives his life. Why doesn't David quit here? Because he's driven by faith, and he wants to bring hope back to Israel. Let no man's heart fail because of him. I find that inspiring. That's what I just missed it. He was trying to bring back hope. He saw all these guys all glum in the mouth and all sad, and he wanted to bring back hope. That's what he was doing. That's all he was doing. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines." You've heard all this before. And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." These are all memory verses. These are all good verses. Why? Because there's so many good quotes in this passage. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, but he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. Here we have with handsome in appearance again. I don't want a ruddy and handsome youth fighting me. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Luckily, they left that part out. The Philistine said to David, "Hey, even without the curses, it's bad enough. Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Come on over, I'll turn you into roadkill." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand." Now, David also says some gross stuff, but I just cut that out because I'm getting tired of reading all the gross stuff. "That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. He has a simple peasant's weapon. He does not have the good technology that assures you a victory. He has a simple peasant's weapon. He has no armor but his faith. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Now that's where I'm going to end it because you know the story already. This is not anything new to you. Who thought that Goliath would win? Nobody did because you heard it when you were 5 years old. Kind of takes the fun out of reading these stories, right? You already know what's going to happen. Well, what makes this story so special? And this is what I want to look at. Why is this one of the greatest stories of all time? Remember, Old Testament, age of heroes. As far as I'm concerned, Bible heroes, whenever they talk about Bible heroes, you're thinking Old Testament. Because there's a lot of heroes of faith. You look at Hebrews, and they go down the list. This guy, because of faith, this guy. Because of faith, this guy. It's heroes of faith, okay? Heroes of faith. But our mission has changed from Old Testament to New Testament. But in the Old Testament, this is special. But is it special because of giants? It's not special because of giants. There are already giants that got defeated before David and after David. It's not special because of slings. Because slings are all over the place, and slings are a perfectly good weapon. They may not be the weapon that you'd want to use, but I mean, it was actually the best weapon to use. I would want to use it. It's not odds. Israel had faced worse odds before and came out on top. Originally on that one I said, Samson ate odds like that for breakfast. I mean, Samson was a super awesome judge. He could do amazing things. He had the strength. It's not that these are the amazing odds. But what makes David and Goliath so special? This is what I think. It's literally a symbolic battle. You have the champion of Israel, the champion of Philistia. I'm not sure if that's how you say that, but I'm going to say Philistia. But also symbolic in myriad ways. Overdog versus underdog. Big versus little, evil versus good, high tech versus low tech, despair versus ineffable hope. There's a lot of themes here. Really, if you take a look at David and Goliath, it is the basis of every good sports movie ever made. It's the basis of a lot of good westerns. It is the thing we want to see because everybody loves the underdog. Everybody's rooting for the underdog to win. It's a great story. And David acted when Israel was paralyzed. Israel could not help but fall in love with him. What can we learn? Volunteer. Find a ministry that you don't feel overly qualified to do, but one you love. Don't listen to those who want to discourage you. Use Pax Fisheries as a source of strength. Use the tools that you know. Be driven by faith. But here's a new thing I want to throw in. I just got this at the last minute. We'll try to do this as quick as we can. How do we take Goliath and put him into the New Testament? Let me explain. How is Jesus like David? Look at all the ways. Acted like a servant, both born underdog, became fully human. David is Israel's champion. Jesus is humanity's champion. David scorned by his brother. Jesus despised and rejected. David's strength from his past. Jesus' strength from his trials. David's for all Israel. Jesus for all humanity. David acted when no one else would. Jesus acted when no one else could. Why our sinful self must die like Goliath. This really is a story about salvation of Israel, but it's also, you can apply this narrative to how Jesus saves us from ourselves. Because Goliath can't be defeated. Our sinful self cannot be defeated. It's the biggest threat to Israel and in our lives. He's the Philistine champion. Our sinful self is our surrogate master. Goliath was arrogant. Our sinful self due to arrogance. He sought to enslave Israel, and our sinful self seeks to enslave us. No one is born Goliath, but we grow into it as we learn about sin. Once sin begins to grow, it becomes a bigger problem, one that we cannot handle by ourselves. The giant we become only wants to enslave us, but try as we might, we can really not fight it and expect to win. No one wants to be the bad guy in the story of their own lives, do they? But once we realize that's the case, that's the role we have, we experience regret, we can want to change. Problem is, there's only one way to change for good. Goliath must die, right? That's the way the story ends. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. And Jesus said in John 14, in our study of John, I thought I'd throw in a little John, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. That all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. We know he doesn't just save with sword and spear. He's saved with a cross. You see, Jesus defeated the Goliath that is the sin in us. And Paul said it this way, for I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me, gave himself for me. I know I'm running so late. It was just a really good lesson. I couldn't stop it. But thank you so much. Here's a review. Read it, memorize it, and we'll see you next week.